Stop whatever you're doing at this very moment because the next few minutes might genuinely reshape the way you think about your health for the rest of your life. I don't say that lightly, and I don't say it to scare you. I say it because what I'm about to share is something most physicians, even many oncologists, never sit down and explain to their patients over the age of 50. Not because the information is hidden or controversial, but because it cannot be written on a prescription pad or handed out in a tidy little bottle. My name is Dr. Katherine, and I've spent the better part of 3 decades studying the cellular mechanisms of cancer, aging, and the quiet daily choices that separate the people who thrive deep into their 80s and 90s from those who don't. And what the research keeps pointing to, especially the findings from a sweeping Harvard study that tracked more than 100,000 adults across nearly 3 decades, is that a very specific cluster of everyday habits can lower overall cancer risk in adults over 50 by as much as 61%. Let that number settle for a moment. 61%. That isn't a new drug. That isn't an expensive procedure. That is simply the way you live your days. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to walk you through the 5 most transformational habits inside that cluster, ranked from meaningful to absolutely life-altering, so that by the time we reach the end of this video together, you'll know exactly what to begin tomorrow when the sun comes up. Now, I want to plant something in your mind right now because the habit sitting at number 1 on this list is something that roughly 9 out of 10 adults over 60 are getting completely, fundamentally wrong. And when you look at the data, correcting this single thing could cut your cancer risk almost in half on its own. So please, I'm asking you, don't jump ahead. Stay with me from start to finish because each habit is designed to reinforce the one before it. They stack. They compound. They build a kind of biological armor around you. Before we dive into the first habit, I want you to do something small but meaningful for me. Drop a comment below and tell me your age, and tell me honestly, has any doctor you've ever sat across from actually spoken to you about preventing cancer, not just scanning for it after the fact? I personally read every single comment on this channel, and your answers truly shape what I research and talk about next. So take 10 seconds, share your story, and let's begin. We'll start at number 5. Number 5 is something so simple, so unassuming, that most people wave it off the moment they hear it. And that dismissal, in my honest clinical opinion, may be quietly costing lives. I'm talking about morning hydration. Specifically, 16 to 20 ounces of cool, clean, filtered water consumed the instant you wake up, before your coffee, before your breakfast, before you even reach for your phone to scroll through the news. I know, it sounds almost embarrassingly basic. But stay with me, because the mechanism underneath this habit is genuinely fascinating, and it becomes more important with every passing year of your life. After roughly the age of 55, there's a quiet biological shift that very few people are warned about. The neural pathways responsible for detecting thirst, what scientists call interoceptive signaling, begin to fade. In plain English, your brain simply stops telling you loudly enough that your cells are drying out. A study conducted at a leading university in Barcelona measured this directly and found that adults over the age of 60 spend most of their waking hours operating 8 to 12% below optimal cellular hydration, and almost none of them ever feel thirsty. They simply acclimate to the deficit. Why does that matter for cancer? Because every one of us has an internal cleaning crew called the lymphatic system. Picture it as the quiet night staff of your body, moving tirelessly through the hallways of your tissues, sweeping up damaged cells, broken DNA fragments, and cellular debris that, left untouched, can seed tumors. That entire cleaning crew runs almost exclusively on water. Starve them of hydration, and the work slows. Damaged cells pile up. Inflammation smolders, and chronic low-grade inflammation, as we now understand from decades of research, is one of the most consistent runways for cancer to take off from, particularly in the colon, bladder, and kidneys. A long-running nurses cohort study out of Harvard tracked women across years of daily habits and found that those who drank 5 or more glasses of water each day had close to a 45% lower risk of developing colon cancer compared to those who barely hit 2. That's an extraordinary protective effect for something that costs you essentially nothing. Proper hydration also fuels something called autophagy, which I like to describe as the quality control inspector living inside every cell you own. Autophagy walks through each cell like an inspector with a clipboard, flagging damaged parts and dismantling them before they can turn rogue. After 65, the efficiency of that inspector drops by roughly a third. Hydration is one of the few levers that nudges it back toward its prime. Here's how I ask my patients to do it. Put a 20-ounce glass of filtered water on your nightstand before bed. The very second your feet touch the floor the next morning, drink all of it. Add a slice of fresh lemon if you'd like, because the compound D-limonene hiding in the peel carries its own quiet anti-tumor properties we'll circle back to. And here is your first synergy tip of the video. Pair that morning glass of water with even 10 minutes of gentle walking, even just pacing around your kitchen, because movement literally pumps your lymphatic system. Research from a prestigious Swedish institute found that this combination can amplify cellular cleansing by up to 40% compared to water alone. That is number 5. It's the quiet foundation, but what you place on top of that foundation at your very next meal might be even more powerful. Number 4 is a category of food that humans have been eating for literally thousands of years across the longest-lived communities on Earth. It was dismissed by Western medicine for decades, and today it sits at the center of more than 1,000 peer-reviewed studies on cancer prevention. I'm talking about fermented foods, plain unsweetened yogurt, kefir, kimchi, sauerkraut, miso, tempeh. Foods alive with the kind of bacteria your gut desperately wants to meet. A remarkable study out of Stanford's medical school, published in one of the most prestigious scientific journals in the world, followed adults who shifted toward a diet rich in fiber and fermented foods. Within weeks, their microbiomes diversified dramatically, and researchers tracked measurable drops in 19 inflammatory proteins, many of them directly tied to cancer progression. But here is why this matters so urgently after 50. As we age, the tight junctions of the gut lining begin to loosen. The technical term is increased intestinal permeability, often called leaky gut in more popular language. When that happens, bacterial toxins called lipopolysaccharides slip into the bloodstream, where they set off a low, smoldering fire of inflammation. That fire acts like fertilizer for precancerous cells, encouraging them to divide, mutate, and eventually spread. One of the patients I will never forget was a woman named Dorothy, 68 years old, living in a small town outside Burlington, Vermont. She came to me with stubbornly high inflammatory markers, exhaustion that her family doctor had chalked up simply to age, and a family history of colon cancer that terrified her. Her diet looked admirable on paper. Plenty of vegetables, lean proteins, whole grains, but there wasn't a single fermented food anywhere on her plate. We introduced 2 small servings a day, a modest bowl of kefir at breakfast, and a spoonful of sauerkraut at lunch. 90 days later, her C-reactive protein, a key inflammation marker, had dropped nearly 40%. Her gastroenterologist called to ask what on earth she had changed. Dorothy told me she felt like herself for the first time in close to a decade. The science underneath this is elegant. When beneficial bacteria ferment the fiber you eat, they produce short-chain fatty acids, most importantly one called butyrate. Butyrate walks through your colon like a quiet bouncer in a nightclub, politely tapping precancerous cells on the shoulder and escorting them toward a programmed self-destruction process called apoptosis. The troublemakers are removed before they can start a fight. Aim for 1 or 2 daily servings of genuinely fermented food, not the pasteurized varieties sitting on the grocery store shelf, because heat kills the living cultures that do the actual work. Look for the phrase live and active cultures on the label. And here is your synergy tip. Pair fermented foods with prebiotic foods, things like garlic, leeks, asparagus, or a slightly green banana, because prebiotics are essentially the groceries that feed the beneficial bacteria you're introducing. One without the other is a house half built. Number 4 is extraordinary. But number 3 is where the research begins to feel almost unbelievable. And if anything I've shared so far has been helpful, this would be a perfect moment to tap that subscribe button and give this video a quick like. I publish science-backed content for adults over 50 every single week, and your support is genuinely what keeps this channel alive. Number 3 is something almost every one of you has heard about your entire life, but I promise you have never heard it framed quite like this. I'm talking about daily walking, but not the leisurely window shopping kind. I'm talking about what modern researchers now call metabolic walking. And the gap between ordinary strolling and metabolic walking, when it comes to cancer, may be nothing short of the difference between starving the disease and feeding it. Your body runs on 2 primary fuels, glucose and oxygen. Cancer cells, Through a quirk of biology first described by a German biochemist back in 1931 and confirmed by hundreds of studies since, are voracious glucose consumers and remarkably poor at using oxygen. This means when you engage in sustained, moderate-intensity movement, meaning your heart rate rises to roughly 55 to 70% of its maximum, two beautiful things happen at once. You drain the circulating glucose that cancer cells rely on, and you flood your tissues with oxygenated blood, which cancer cells genuinely struggle to survive inside of. A sweeping analysis by the American Cancer Society, reviewing the habits of more than 1.4 million adults, found that moderate, regular physical activity was linked to a 42% lower risk of colon cancer, a 38% lower risk of breast cancer, and a 27% lower risk of lung cancer, even among people who had never once smoked. Those are extraordinary numbers for an intervention that requires no prescription and no copay. But the aging piece of this is what makes it urgent. After 65, your mitochondria, the tiny power plants inside every cell, decline in both number and function by roughly 35%. Mitochondrial dysfunction is one of the loudest drumbeats of both aging and cancer, and sustained moderate walking is one of the very few interventions proven to trigger mitochondrial biogenesis, which is a long word that simply means your body begins building brand new, healthy power plants in response. Picture it like a utility company quietly upgrading the entire electrical grid of your city overnight while you sleep. Metabolic walking means 30 to 45 minutes of continuous walking at a pace where you can still hold a conversation but would struggle to sing a song, at least 5 days per week. Ideally in the morning, before your first full meal, because walking in a mildly fasted state amplifies the glucose draining effect dramatically. One of my favorite patients was a man named Thomas, 73 years old, a retired high school principal from the outskirts of Minneapolis. He came to me after a precancerous polyp had been removed during a routine colonoscopy. He was terrified. He hadn't exercised in years. We started him on a gentle morning walking protocol, 35 minutes, 5 days per week, alongside some dietary adjustments. 2 years later, at his follow-up colonoscopy, the report came back entirely clean. His oncologist actually wrote in his chart that the improvement in his inflammatory panel was extraordinary. Thomas told me walking felt like medicine he was pouring into himself. He wasn't exaggerating. It literally was. For synergy, stack your morning walk directly on top of your morning hydration from habit number 5. And whenever possible, walk somewhere you can see real sunlight on your skin. Morning light entrains your circadian rhythm, and your circadian rhythm, as we'll see in a moment, directly governs the immune system's ability to hunt down cancer cells before they ever establish themselves. Number 3 is powerful, but the next two are where this conversation becomes genuinely revolutionary. Number 2 is a compound, actually a family of compounds, found in a very specific category of vegetables, and the way it fights cancer in aging bodies is unlike almost anything else in the nutritional literature. I'm talking about sulforaphane, the remarkable bioactive molecule found in cruciferous vegetables. Broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, cabbage, arugula, and most potently, broccoli sprouts. Researchers at Johns Hopkins, where much of the foundational work on this compound was done, discovered that sulforaphane flips a master genetic switch called NRF2. I like to describe NRF2 as the chief of security for your DNA. When the chief clocks in for the shift, over 200 protective genes come online at once. Genes that detoxify your cells, genes that shield you from oxidative stress, and most importantly, genes responsible for repairing damaged DNA before it has a chance to mutate into cancer. And here is the aging-specific tragedy that makes this so urgent. NRF2 activity falls by roughly 40% between the ages of 50 and 70. The DNA repair system that protected you through your 30s and 40s is quietly dimming. Sulforaphane essentially flips the lights back on. A University of Illinois study found that people with regular sulforaphane intake had a 52% lower risk of bladder cancer, a 41% lower incidence of prostate cancer, and meaningful reductions in breast and lung cancer markers as well. And perhaps most astonishingly, research from a major comprehensive cancer center showed that sulforaphane specifically targets something called cancer stem cells. These are the generals of the cancer army. Conventional chemotherapy can wipe out the soldiers on the front lines, but if the generals survive, they rebuild the entire force. Sulforaphane goes after the generals. But here is the preparation detail that almost everyone misses. Sulforaphane itself isn't present in broccoli in its ready-to-use form. It's created through a chemical reaction when you chop or chew the vegetable, activating an enzyme called myrosinase. And myrosinase is destroyed the moment the vegetable is cooked above about 140 degrees Fahrenheit, which means fully boiled or roasted broccoli delivers only a small fraction of its potential. The optimal approach is to chop or lightly crush your broccoli or sprouts and then let it sit on the cutting board for about 40 minutes before cooking. That pause lets the enzyme reaction finish. Then you can lightly steam it for no more than 3 or 4 minutes. Raw broccoli sprouts, on the other hand, require no cooking at all and can deliver up to 50 times more sulforaphane per gram than mature broccoli heads. Aim for about half a cup of raw sprouts daily, or 1 full cup of carefully prepared broccoli. Your synergy tip here is crucial. Pair your cruciferous vegetables with a sprinkle of raw mustard seed powder or a few slices of raw radish. Both are naturally rich in active myrosinase, and adding them restores the enzyme activity that cooking destroys, effectively multiplying sulforaphane absorption by as much as 4-fold, according to research from a renowned food science institute in the United Kingdom. Number 2 is remarkable. But what I'm about to share for number 1 is what all of this research has been quietly building toward. And it's the single habit that most prevention conversations never fully reach. Number 1 is sleep, but not just sleep in the ordinary sense. I mean specifically what cutting-edge researchers now call oncological sleep architecture, the particular timing, depth, and consistency of sleep that switches on your body's most powerful internal anti-cancer machinery. And when you look at what happens to cancer risk in its absence, the findings are honestly chilling. During deep, slow-wave sleep, your brain activates something called the glymphatic system, a waste clearance network first described by researchers in upstate New York in the early 2010s. It uses cerebrospinal fluid to literally rinse toxic proteins and cellular debris out of your brain and central nervous system. Picture a factory that runs 24/7, and the only time the cleaning crews can safely power wash the machinery is after hours, when the factory is dark and the assembly lines are still. That is exactly what deep sleep is. It is your maintenance window. But the cancer connection reaches far beyond the brain. During those same stages of deep sleep, your body pours out melatonin at peak concentrations. And melatonin, despite its reputation as merely a sleep hormone, is one of the most powerful natural antioxidants known to science. A major review in a leading cancer research journal showed that melatonin directly blocks tumor angiogenesis, which is the process by which cancers build the blood vessels they need to grow. It also stimulates natural killer cells, the elite tactical unit of your immune system, whose entire purpose is to hunt down and eliminate cancer cells before they establish a foothold. And here's the devastating statistic. Melatonin production falls by as much as 70% between the ages of 40 and 70. Most adults over 65 produce only trace amounts during sleep. Your single most powerful internal anti-cancer system is running on vapors. A major study from an international cancer research body classified chronic night shift work, which disrupts sleep architecture, as a probable human carcinogen, not a risk factor. A carcinogen, the same designation given to certain industrial chemicals and pesticides. That is how seriously disrupted sleep is being taken by the highest levels of cancer science. One of the most moving cases I've worked with was a woman named Barbara, 72 years old, a retired pediatric nurse living outside Tucson, Arizona. She was averaging 5 to 6 hours of restless sleep a night and waking multiple times. Her immune panel showed natural killer cell activity so suppressed it alarmed me. We built what I call a sleep recalibration protocol. A consistent 10 p.m. bedtime, complete blackout curtains, the bedroom cooled to 67 degrees, all screens turned off 90 minutes before bed, and a small glass of tart cherry juice in the evening for its natural melatonin precursors. Within 6 weeks, she was sleeping 7.5 hours consistently. At her 3-month follow-up, her natural killer cell activity had risen by 47%. Her oncology team was astonished. She told me it was the first time she'd slept like that since her 40s. The data is crystal clear. Adults over 60 who consistently sleep 7 to 8.5 hours per night in truly dark, cool environments show cancer mortality rates up to 48% lower than those sleeping under 6 hours, according to a 20-year cohort study from a respected California university. This isn't a minor factor. This is the master switch. To optimize your sleep for cancer defense, commit to these without negotiation. Set a consistent bedtime and wake time, even on weekends, because your circadian rhythm does not recognize holidays. Make your bedroom genuinely dark, because even small amounts of light suppress melatonin. Keep the room cool, somewhere between 65 and 68 degrees Fahrenheit, and avoid eating within 3 hours of sleep, because digestion competes with the cellular repair work your body is trying to prioritize at night. Your synergy tip for sleep is to link it directly with morning sunlight exposure from habit number 3. Morning light sets the timer on your circadian clock and directly increases the melatonin your body releases that night. The two habits working together create a biological environment where cancer genuinely struggles to survive. All of the research I've referenced tonight will be linked in the description below. I'd encourage you to read it, bring it to your next doctor's appointment, and ask the questions your visits rarely leave time for. Here is what I want you to carry with you as we close. You are not too old for prevention. The science has no age limit. Whether you are 55 or 85, whether you've weathered a cancer scare or never given it a thought in your life, your body still holds an extraordinary capacity to repair, to defend, and to renew itself when you give it the conditions it was designed for. These 5 habits, morning hydration, daily fermented foods, metabolic walking, sulforaphane-rich vegetables, and restorative sleep, are not exotic rituals reserved for biohackers or elite athletes. They are the native environment of a thriving human body. They cost almost nothing. They require no prescription. And every single morning the sun rises, you are handed a fresh opportunity to begin again. Your independence, your vitality, your ability to show up for the people who love you, that is absolutely worth 30 minutes of walking, a full glass of water, and a sacred bedtime. Don't let anyone, not even yourself, whisper that it's too late. The research says otherwise, and so do I. If this video has helped you in any way, please subscribe to this channel, give it a like, and share it with someone you love. Every single week, we go this deep into the science of aging well, and your support is what keeps that work possible. And now, I want to hear from you. Which of these 5 habits are you going to begin with first? And what has been the single biggest obstacle standing between you and a truly good night's sleep? Leave your answer in the comments below. I read every single one.